So let me start with a question. Is life getting any of you down? Well, if it is, and you're under 50, you'll definitely want to read Jonathan Rauch's new book, The Happiness Curve, Why Life Gets Better After 50. And if you're feeling down and you're already over 50, well, tough luck. No, just kidding. You should also read Jonathan's book. Jonathan is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a contributing editor at The Atlantic, describes how satisfaction in life follows a kind of U-curve, which is to say contentment tends to be high for people when they're young, in their 20s and 30s, and then plunges through middle age, but later takes a turn for the better after 50. There's a lot of scholarship supporting this so-called happiness curve, as Jonathan details in his book, which he augments with many anecdotes about individuals as well as reflections on his own life. One thing I found particularly interesting is that the U is not unique to humans. According to a study published by the National Academy of Sciences, the curve also is found in apes. So you can thank our long ago ancestors for it. Apart from whatever reassurance and comfort we as individuals might take in this U-curve idea, it does have larger societal implications, as Jonathan points out. Given especially that people are living longer, Jonathan argues that society needs to revise its story about adult development, seeing midlife not so much as prone to crisis, but as a transition stage where feelings of competition and ambition give way to a sense of greater compassion and gratitude and prepare us for an extended old age, or what some sociologists are calling encore adulthood. Now, over his own career, Jonathan, who turned 58 last month, has written about a wide range of topics involving public policy, culture, or government. For a number of years, he worked as a journalist for such publications as the Winston-Salem Journal in North Carolina, the National Journal, and The Economist before joining Brookings. He's a winner of the National Magazine Award, and his 6 previous books addressed such subjects as gay marriage, free speech, Japan, and why politics and government are broken. As you'll hear in a minute, he experienced his own ups and downs through his 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s before, no doubt, finding total bliss with the publication of his new book. Now, Jonathan is going to talk for a little minute and do some slides, and then he's going to be in conversation. We have an added treat for you this afternoon. He's going to be in conversation here this afternoon with Scott Stossel, the editor of The Atlantic and author of My Age of Anxiety, which came out several years ago and remains really one of the most instructive and revealing books on anxiety disorders. Scott, in case anyone is wondering, is just a year or two shy himself of 50. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jonathan Rauch.
What an amazing honor to be at my favorite bookstore in the world. I've been in your chairs for so many of these, and to see so many friends here. If there are 2 seats in the second row, if anyone would like to come and sit down. Every chair is filled, though, other than that, and that is fantastic. One of the best things about turning 58 is having friends from every stage of life. There are people in this room I've known and been close to since the age of 5. They're friends from work, and I'd be remiss not to thank 3 very special people who are here among many special people. One is Bradley Graham, who has done such an outstanding job of turning Politics and Prose into so much more than a bookstore, such a vital resource, a true community treasure. Another is my husband, Michael, who's standing in the back trying to appear inconspicuous. We're married now as of 8 years ago, and that all by itself is a miracle. And finally, Scott Stossel, the editor of Atlantic, who gave birth to this book originally in the form of an article in his pages, and since then has done so much to support the book. You'll see his name on the cover, in fact. Scott, thank you so much for being here today and for all that you've done. I thought I'd just briefly introduce some of the themes in the book with a few images, and then Scott and I will have a conversation. But I just wanted to acquaint you with some of the core ideas, why I think you might be interested. The thesis of this book, the basic idea, is that pretty much everything you think you know about age and happiness is wrong. The standard view is that we have an adventurous and exciting and volatile 20s, which is largely true, and then we have sort of the peak of accomplishment and success and satisfaction in midlife, unless we have the misfortune to have a so-called midlife crisis, and then it's kind of downhill from there. We kind of fade into senescence, obsolescence, and the misery and frailty of old age. This turns out to be wrong, and because we believe these wrong things, we make ourselves miserable. So the research that explains what's going on is really quite new. It's only about a decade old. But to really begin this story, you have to go back to the 1840s, 160 years ago, to someone who is not a scientist. His name is Thomas Cole, a famous American landscape artist whose masterpiece, The Voyage of Life, hangs in the National Gallery only a few miles from here. I warmly recommend that you all see it. Here's how it looks today. It's got a room of its own. These are considered among the greatest treasures and most beloved works in the National Gallery. They're a quadriptych of 4 paintings that depict 4 stages of life. Now, this, remember, was all done decades before the advent of what we now call psychology. Cole didn't know any of that, yet he gets some very important things remarkably right. This is childhood. You can see babies emerging from the darkness of the womb. The guardian angel is behind him. He's in a gilt boat. Guardian angel has his hand on the tiller, so he's guiding the baby through life. The baby is very happy. If you look very closely, you'll see that the figurehead on the prow of the boat is an angel holding an hourglass, telling us that this is a journey fundamentally about time. And notice that there are no human figures in the photo apart from the voyager himself. I first saw the second one, Youth, when I first beheld these paintings. I was about to turn 20 years old, my first encounter at the National Gallery, and this one absolutely gobsmacked me because I was exactly the same age as the figure in this image. The voyager is now about approximately 20 years old, a young man with first growth of beard. Notice the guardian angel, who's never within sight. He's always behind the voyager. The voyager's not conscious of the guardian angel. The guardian angel is now standing aloof on the shore, and the young man is himself holding the prow of his boat. He's guiding his own journey. He's reaching upwards. This is his ambition to the castle in the sky, his dreams. Now, the castle in the sky can be interpreted as his ambitions for success in life. But as we'll see, a better interpretation psychologically is that these are his ambitions, his expectations for his future happiness, if he meets those goals. But the iconography here is absolutely brilliant. This is my favorite of the 4 paintings. If you look very closely, I don't have a pointer, but you'll see 2 things. First of all, if you go straight, that's the road not taken. It's a dirt path. That's the road that leads to the castle in the sky. From our level on the mezzanine, above the view of the voyager, we can see what he cannot. The river is going to bend away from the castle in the sky, and you can just dimly see way off to the right there, it is headed for something else, which you're about to see. Interestingly, that is exactly how I felt when I was age 20. I had no status, no sense of my own occupation, no sense of what my future would hold, yet these grand dreams of achieving great things and somehow achieving great satisfaction in my life. The next one is called Manhood. This is midlife. So when I started showing these paintings, I did not know this, but this painting always gets a laugh, and it's always a rueful laugh. The voyager is now in he's probably about 40. He's a grown man with dark hair and a beard. He's in the prime of life physically. But as you can see, he's supplicating the heavens because He's on rapids, headed rapidly downhill. If you look closely, you'll see that the tiller has broken off the boat. He's no longer in control of the boat. The guardian angel is still watching him, but is now even more aloof, far off in heaven and completely invisible to the voyager. And as you can see, he's headed for some very serious rapids. He is imploring the heavens above him. Now, he's looking up toward God, but you see something there that looks like some greenish-gray clouds that are blocking his view of heaven. You can't see this in this small replication. Paintings are huge, wonderfully detailed. So go online and look. What looks like a cloud there are the faces of 3 demons. Those are the demons that are talking to him and telling him his life is a waste of time. Because when I was in my 40s, I had achieved more than I had ever imagined I could. I can tick it all off, and I did in my 40s. Yet I had these voices which I would wake up to telling me I was wasting my life and I should throw everything away and start over again. I didn't know where that was coming from, but I knew I had a problem at age 45 when I won the highest prize in my profession, the National Magazine Award. It's the equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize for magazine writers. And that finally made me feel satisfied and fulfilled in life for a period of about 10 days. After which, these voices came right back to telling me that my life had been wasted and I had done nothing worthwhile with it. And that's when I knew that what was going on was not in any way rational or connected to the objective circumstances of my life. I'm overinterpreting the painting a bit, but I interpret those demons as the voices I heard telling me that my life was wasted. Here again, we can see what the voyager does not, which is if you look through the gap in the water there, you see smooth waters ahead. This is the last painting, Old Age. Here our voyager is, the boat is now battered, the hourglass, not only is the tiller gone, the hourglass is gone. He's out of time. He can finally now see the guardian angel who is in these calm waters, ushering him up toward heaven where he is being greeted by angels. This, of course, is, he's about to go to a better world. What should we make of these paintings in light of today, apart from the fact that they're absolutely gorgeous? Well, flash forward to just a few years ago. This is a chart from my Brookings colleague, Carol Graham. This is the happiness curve, otherwise known as the U-shaped life satisfaction curve. This is age versus happiness for the United States. These are all based on absolutely huge data sets, millions of data points. And what we see here is that happiness tends to drop and bottom out in midlife, roughly age 45 to age 50, and then increase, and just keep on increasing. Now, you may say, my life doesn't look like that, or do you really expect me to be happier at 90 than I was at 30? So let me tell you something important about this, which is really hard to get your mind around, because it took me a long time to do it myself. The fact that this curve is smooth tells you this is not anyone's life. This is not even the average happiness of anyone's life. This is what happens when a statistician takes a large amount of data about happiness and age and corrects for all the life conditions that you can think of: income, education, employment, marriage, children, all the stuff that you can put in there. You boil it out. Well, then you'd expect a straight line, right? Time itself should not have any effect on happiness after you've accounted for whether people are healthy or sick and are unemployed. But it does. That's the independent effect of time all by itself on how happy you are. That's the United States. Here's the world. You see it's the same shape. It's lower. The world is not as happy as the United States in absolute terms, but the pattern is the same. So, if life is otherwise smooth for you, if you're experiencing a lot of success and not a lot of trauma or setback, you're more likely to feel the effect of time. Think of it as the undercurrent beneath the boat on the voyage of life. Now, this undercurrent doesn't determine your happiness at any given age. It's only a factor. There are other factors. What's the condition of your boat? How strong are you able to row? Has your boat capsized? What's your destination? There are lots of other things going on, but other things being equal, you may, as I did, especially if your journey has been smooth, experience this effect of time. So we know something pretty fundamental is going on because this is the U-curve in great apes. Chimps and orangutans, 4 samples in 3 countries. Same pattern. Something fairly fundamental is happening. Something I love to point out, because Thomas Cole is so cool, 2 things. I mentioned there are no people in his pictures other than the Voyager. There are no buildings, there are no cities, there's no social life. Again, over-interpreting somewhat. I think that Thomas Cole is painting a psychological journey. He's not saying this is what will actually happen to you every day of your life. He's saying midlife, it's harder to feel grateful and satisfied. Those are the rapids, the internal obstacles that we would feel to feeling satisfied. And he's absolutely right about that. And of course, Thomas Cole and the U-curve are simply 2 different graphic representations of the exact same phenomenon. One of the most surprising findings, and also the most robust finding in the book, the effect of time does not wear off. Now, if you have cancer, you will not be particularly happy, but other things being equal, once you pass the midlife trough, the effect of time is actually to help you be satisfied with life. Again, it won't counter all the other things going on in life, but the current, instead of moving against you, moves toward you. And that goes on right to the end of life. This is a graph by a famous psychiatrist named Dilip Jeste, University of California at San Diego. He was so astonished by his results that he went back and repeated the study with a much bigger sample and came back with exactly the same thing. The dotted line is the number of people at every age who have no disability. It's decreasing. In their 50s, 60% of people have no disability. By their 80s and 90s, only 20% have no disability. You would think you're getting more disabled, you would get less happy. That's the stereotype we have about aging. In fact, successful aging, which is a pretty close proxy for satisfaction with life, rises right through the period. In his sample, even people who were dealing with setbacks like cancer were amazingly contented with their life. So the stereotypes we have of the invulnerable master of the universe, middle age, and if you're not feeling it, it must be a crisis, and then the stereotype of the frail and miserable and lonely old age, all turn out to be exactly backwards. How do we deal with this socially in American society? So here's what I urge you to do, not now, leave your phone in your pocket, but when you get home, do a Google image search on midlife crisis. This is what you'll find. I don't know if folks can see this. This is everything that comes up looks more or less like this. The guy on the inappropriate bicycle with the inappropriate female, the middle-aged guy with the whole harem of inappropriate females. The one on the lower left is the middle-aged guy holding the gun to the head of a stuffed bunny, saying midlife crisis begins with baldness and ends with taking your common sense. There's much less midlife crisis iconography for women, but what there is, it looks like this. Wrinkles. Ah! So that's how the culture treats midlife. And then, of course, there's this. With apologies to Scott, the red sports car. I say apologies because when we did this article, we put the red sports car on the cover of Atlantic. The icon of midlife is the red sports car, the inappropriate car that we go out and buy because we're so unhappy and we do impulsive and irresponsible things. The car is not always red. Now and then it's yellow. One of the central takeaways of this book is we get this all wrong. We deal with midlife and the vulnerabilities of midlife and the U-curve 2 primary ways. One is mockery, that's this. The other is medicalization. You must be depressed, go see a doctor. Few people have a midlife crisis. Most people do what I do. They just soldier quietly on. And most people are ashamed and embarrassed to say how they're feeling at this age in life because they don't want to be the butt of jokes and they don't want to panic their spouse or their family. So they're holding it in. They're getting no social support. A big and important thing that this book tries to do is say, please rethink that notion. It's not midlife crisis, it's midlife transition. We can talk in the discussion that follows about the very interesting science of what's actually going on here. Bradley alluded to it earlier. It's a transition. It's a healthy, normal, natural transition. It reboots us emotionally for what is, in most people, an amazing rebirth of surprising contentment later in life. That's what's going on here. So we need to change the way we think about adult development, and along the way, we will make ourselves and each other a lot less miserable. Thanks. Scott, why don't you join me?
Thank you for that. That was very interesting, and you covered, set up a lot of the ground that I wanted to cover. And we'll try to move very quickly because I know we want to get. There are going to be a lot of audience questions too.
Yeah, and I took a little too long.
Let me start with an awkward question, or what I hope is not an awkward question. So much. I mean, there is. Well, actually, let me back up. Let me start by actually saying. By shilling for the book and saying that you actually can get Thomas Cole's quadriptych by buying the book. You can actually see all four here, both on the frontispiece and the back section. The potentially awkward question I wanted to ask is that, I mean, obviously you have delved very, very deeply, starting with the article that you did for the Atlantic, but for the book into the research on this. So you're on very, very solid ground, and your own story is an N of one. It's an anecdote. But now when you started working on this, probably what, 53, 54, maybe even younger. Do you still feel like it holds up? Are you still continuing to feel your contentment increase, and it's bearing up your thesis?
Yes. I turned out to be, am I on enough? I turned out to be a textbook case. It's not the only thing going on in life, but around the time I turned 50, for the first time I had some really major setbacks in life, the deaths of both parents, the loss of a job, other things, and yet I began to sense in my early 50s the fog was kind of lifting, the voices in my mind that were saying that I had wasted my life began to recede. And that became clear as I got into my 50s. This is a gentle curve. It's not a crisis. It's gentle going down and gentle going up. But yeah, it's. I'm happy to say it's continued.
That's fantastic, and a hopeful sign for me as I turn the corner to 49 in a few months.
I won't ask you how your 40s have been.
Well, I will say, and we don't have to turn this into a therapy session, but some of your diary entries from your mid-40s are uncannily similar to my own.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, they really resonated, and his diary entries were sort of like, I've achieved, all the success. Why am I not happier? And in fact, I don't know if you remember this. I was with you at the table when you won the National Magazine Award, and you seemed very happy then. But that was, on the first day of the 10. So
that's right. I should just clarify for everybody. There's two senses of happiness. One is mood, cheerfulness. That's not what we're talking about. That's measured with questions like, how often did you smile yesterday? We're talking about life satisfaction. How fulfilled do you feel about your life? And yeah, that's what I had so much trouble feeling.
You previewed this with your slides, but the evidence is so compelling and so recent at this point. I mean, basically barely a decade old. But Andrew Oswald, if I'm not mistaken, and Danny Blanchflower, both of whom you met with and interviewed, sort of stumbled onto this idea of the U-curve, which is the idea that, as you showed in the slides, contentment or happiness sort of declines through 20s into the 30s, troughs in the 40s, and then again it varies depending on the country and other things, but then goes up. What's astonishing about this, from a social science perspective, is how stable these findings are. And also Carol Graham, had actually done some of the research that preceded. Talk a little bit more about how strong those findings are, and what the sort of surprising and profound implications of that are.
Yeah, people weren't looking for the happiness curve. These were economists, actually, who were exploring the relationship between things like unemployment and happiness, and they had these huge new data sets to play with. Gallup surveys thousands of people every day in countries all over the world. So they were able to do these massive data calculations. So they were correcting for stuff, and this relationship with time just fell out. No one was expecting it, and at first they just ignored it. It was like this, there was a sentence in an article said that also there appears to be a U-shaped element with time. But it just kept turning up again and again. Not every country or every data set, but so often and so consistently that Blanchflower and Oswald, two British economists who are, a lot of the book is actually a scientific detective story. It's one of my favorite aspects, is the weird way in which science works, and came at this, began to realize that they might be seeing something fundamental. So they began looking at other things like depression meds and how those correlate with age. And then finally they looked at chimps and orangutans. And by that point, which is only a few years ago, they and others began to realize they'd stumbled on something that might be fundamental to the way humans are wired.
No, you just anticipated my next question, and again, this gets to your sort of detective, your quest story. That what's so fascinating about you have these researchers, and then one will email another, and suddenly they've been doing disparate stuff, and they realize, wow, we have something in common here. What's so profound about the primate findings is that it suggests, as you alluded with your slide, that this is not something that is totally a function of culture of human society. It may be hardwired biologically. It's an evolutionarily biological genetic thing, and that age itself. And you have an equation there from Martin Seligman that you propose should be modified to add time. That there's actually something, and I'm sort of embedding a lot of questions in this setup here, but there may be something evolutionarily adaptive about the very idea of hitting this trough in middle age and then turning the corner in later life.
Yeah, so the what is going on here is quite clear from the data, and you already saw it. The tricky part is the why. Why should this be happening in humans, much less other primates? And what I think is going on, based on looking at a lot of science in multiple fields, this is coming from economics and psychology and neuroscience and psychiatry, is that three things are going on at once, and we won't get into the weeds, but the first thing that's going on is the castle in the sky. When we're young, we're overly optimistic about how happy success will make us. That's how we're wired by nature. That's where ambition comes from. If I achieve all my goals, I'll be super happy, of course. But ambition is wired so that it always moves the goalposts. We get to our 40s, we've had multiple years of hitting our goals, yet we want even more. We haven't achieved this satisfaction. We've had years of disappointment in how satisfied we are. That makes us even less satisfied. You get in a self-spinning spiral. Strangest finding of this book. Midlife crisis, midlife malaise can be and often is literally about nothing. It can be a self-fueling spiral based on unhappiness about your unhappiness. And that's what happened to me, because there was no objective reason for it. Second thing that's going on is our values change. This part comes from psychology. It looks like we're wired to care about ambition and social achievement when we're young. And that's how we get status and mating opportunities. But humans are unusual because nature keeps us around for 30 or 40 years now after our most fertile years. In all but 3 other species, nature throws our bodies away when we can no longer reproduce. So why does it keep us around? It seems that what's going on is we get reprogrammed as we age to be more oriented toward community, commitment for others, and interpersonal connection. And it's been called the grandmother hypothesis, that these animals, other animal models that have this, they actually do better. The younger people, the children and grandchildren, do better when the older people are around because of their social skills. So it seems like we're being wired to give back to the community, and it turns out giving back to the community is a much better way to become happy than being ambitious for status. And that's what accounts for a lot of the fact that people late in life have this degree of contentment.
Is that true for monkeys too? They become less ambitious for status? We don't know, obviously.
Yeah, we don't know, but their behavior changes in that general direction. Yeah, and they become more selective about who they want to be friends with, which is also part of it. They start valuing those precious relationships more. And then the third thing that's going on is brain science. You can actually look in people's brains, and as people get older, they react more to positive things and less to negative things. They become less emotionally volatile. They become less regretful. When we're young, we react in very extreme ways to negative stimuli, and those also drop. So all three of these things seem to be going on at once in this kind of dance.
Well, you've just set up again my next question, which is, you have fascinating research about expectations. There's a whole body of research on this, and it's a little bit, I wouldn't say it's paradoxical. It's actually logical once you parse it.
Yeah.
But that actually, as our expectations in our 20s, we all believe, or generally tend to believe, that life is going to be great. It's going to get better and better. We're going to achieve all of our goals, and it's going to be amazing. Then you get into your 30s and your 40s, and you start to reckon with the reality that that didn't happen. And you become more pessimistic or depressively realistic, as you say. And there's this fascinating chart that you have where the moment when your expectations for future happiness dip below your current level of content, that's actually a great moment, because it means your life is going to get much better.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about that?
It's hard to do this without showing the chart, and charts,
I can hold it up.
But yeah, sort of what's going on there is early in life, our expectations for happiness exceed the reality, year after year. And after 20 years of that, we start thinking, I'll never be happy, because we felt disappointed every year. So we're looking back at our past. I'm now age 45. I've just won
87 in the book.
Page 87, yeah, go to the text. You're looking back on your life at age 45, or I am, and thinking, I've done all this stuff, and I'm still not as happy as I expected to be. That really sucks. I'm a disappointed person. I'll never be happy. So now I'm looking at my future, and I'm pessimistic about happiness in the future. So I'm disappointed in the past. I'm pessimistic about the future. That is a bad place to be. But here's the thing. In the very process of my expectations coming downward over time, as I age and begin to understand that status and achievement are not the keys to happy life, those are rebalancing me. And by the time I'm in my early 50s, my expectations for future happiness are low, but my brain has started to change in these ways. And what was year after year of disappointment becomes year after year of unexpected surprises, pleasant surprises. So you get this flip, and that's the change in the undercurrent in the ocean. Until about 50, other things being equal.
The undertow.
The undertow is working against you, and then it switches. And no one expects the switch. That's why people need to know this research and read books like this one. One of the best things that you can do if you're in your late 30s and you're entering this period is understand what's going on, because it's not intuitively transparent.
So you have a whole chapter on the paradox of aging, and we could talk for a whole hour about that. But succinctly, the idea is that actually, surprisingly and against all conventional wisdom, people continue to get happier, not just in their 50s, but their 60s, their 70s, and sometimes their 80s and 90s. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's called the paradox of aging because the things that we think we want and need to be happy tend to diminish as we get older. Health, vitality, status, achievement. Yet the opposite takes place. And it's been found again and again. It's the least controversial aspect of all this research. It so surprised the psychologists who found it that they thought their work must originally have been wrong. So what's going on there? Well, the best description is that our values change faster than our bodies. And no one sees that coming either. This is also completely non-transparent. But other things being equal, yeah, we're aging, we're losing capacity, we're giving up stuff. My left knee's become a chronic problems, so I can't do all the stuff I used to. But even faster than that, our values tend to reorient toward caring for each other, the neighbor's kids, who are, 5 and 3 and like the best kids in the world, and just hanging out with them comes to seem more important. And this actually leads to a kind of deepening of life. I originally thought when I got into the book that, it must be terrible to have to be reoriented, to have lower goals and lower expectations for how happy I'll be, giving up all my grand dreams of winning the Nobel Prize in literature. But it turns out people who go through this don't feel that way. I talked to dozens of people. You'll find the book is also lots of biographies of people at different points on the curve.
He is a 94-year-old woman
94
who's super
woman.
happy. She rates her happiness out of 10.
And she actually passed away while the book was in press. And what I didn't know when I interviewed her is she was, at that point, a cancer patient.
Wow.
Yeah, and she said this was the best time of her life. I would hear this again and again, and I'd hear people say in their 50s, I've discovered the meaning in making jewelry. So you'd think, well, that's kind of sad, meaning in making. But it's the opposite of sad, because people begin, as their minds and values change, they begin finding added depth and reward in being there every day, in being present, in giving back to others, in developing new skills, things that I would have thought were trivial when I'm 20 and I'm reaching for that castle. There's an added richness that comes to be able, in being able to savor those things.
One of the recurring themes of the book, which becomes more trenchant and deepened as the book goes along, is that the shift from pursuing careerist professional achievement gives way, which is the, as you call it, sort of we're borrowing from someone else, like riding the elephant. Like we are, Jonathan Haidt, we're evolutionarily programmed to try to get the little dopamine benefit of small successes again and again and again. That doesn't necessarily lead to lasting contentment. And what you found, or what all these researchers found, is that as people age into their 50s, 60s, 70s, they start to reprioritize, as you say, and value social connection over professional achievement or sort of garnering accolades.
Yeah, it turns out there's a word for all this. It's called the Hedonic Treadmill. I was on it. That's the treadmill you're on when you keep trying to achieve more and you think the next little increment will bring you happiness, but you want even more than that. And that's why people who chase wealth, for example, never seem to arrive and in fact often get less satisfied. And as we age, our values shift off the hedonic treadmill toward community and connection, and it turns out that those are the opposite of status and achievement, because deep friendships and family and commitment and giving back, these are things that actually add to accumulating emotional capital over time. These are things that are lasting. And as we reorient ourselves to that, the hedonic treadmill, the hamster wheel that I felt I was on in my 40s, begins to recede.
And then from there you transition to talking about the fascinating research on wisdom, which was for a long time kind of a squishy, it's a hoary subject going back to Aristotle and Plato. It has become less squishy and more psychologically measurable and neurobiologically measurable. Talk about that, and that there may be there is an evolutionary benefit, I'm convinced, to the development of wisdom.
To me, my favorite chapter of the book is the one I get the least opportunity to talk about, and that's chapter 7, which is on the biology of wisdom. I grew up thinking, well, wisdom is this kind of ancient religious concept or a philosophical concept, and you don't hear the word in modern life. Everyone says, the best compliment I can say about Scott is, oh, he's very smart. You wouldn't hear someone say, Scott Stossel, he's very wise. It just doesn't come up. Well, so again, very recent science has established that wisdom is a distinctive trait. It's not at all like intelligence or experience or knowledge or anything else, number one. Number two, it's scientifically meaningful and measurable. You can test people for it in ways that are consistently reliable. And number three, it's very pro-social. Wisdom is unique because it not only makes ourselves better off and happy, for those who are lucky enough to have it, it's rare at any age, but it makes the people around us happier. So the notion here, it's still conjectural, but it makes sense to me and I guess also to you. It turns out a society with more wise people in it the kids are going to do better, the grandkids are going to do better. So you can't say that age makes us wise because there are a lot of unwise people at any age. But what you can say is that this aging process, the shift in values, gives us better equipment to be wise. It makes us more receptive to the values of wisdom. And that turns out to be good for all of society. It's really cool stuff. And it's science, by the way. You got neuroscientists.
It's fascinating. I highly recommend the whole book, but that chapter in particular. You end the book, or I guess the penultimate chapter. This is not a conventional self-help book, but obviously you're bringing to bear your own experience. You have tons of narratives from the folks that you interviewed, which are all incredibly compelling, and these people in different stages of life dealing with different things, and you've extracted from this certain lessons. The biggest one, and tell me if I'm wrong, is and this is something that would have been useful to you if you'd known it going through. Be patient, particularly, and this is advice for people going through the trough of the U curve. You don't realize you're going through that trough, but you have a number of other guidances.
Well. I'll make people read the book in order to get them all. But yeah, there's a self-help chapter in this book, the things that I wish I had known, which is targeted to people, say, age 35 to 38. And they include, for example, understand that this is normal. Just understanding that interrupts this negative feedback cycle of thinking I'm unhappy and I shouldn't be unhappy. There's something wrong with me that makes me even less happy. So knowing that this is normal and common and perfectly natural is important. Another thing is step, don't leap. It's sometimes important to change your job, your career, your marriage, whatever, in midlife, but be careful. Do it logically, stepwise, plan it carefully, consult lots of people, be conscientious because it's a treacherous time. Another is don't let yourself become isolated. The gay part of me understands this because I was a closeted gay person for many years, and talking to people, I discovered loads and loads of closeted middle-aged people who were afraid to confess the fact that they were feeling vulnerable and unhappy and had no reason to. They thought people would think they were weak or sick. That makes it much worse. So go get support, get coaching. You don't need psychotherapy, but you do need friends and confidants. And then there's the one you just alluded to, which is, remember, time is on your side. There are no shortcuts, but you're going through something. There is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So wait it out. Just waiting is often the best thing to do. And there's more along that line.
You've given, and you say you've used this strategy yourself, but I've often defaulted to the strategy of just muddling through, and you've given a kind of intellectual justification for that. I guess two final questions, or two versions of the same question before we open it up to questions from the audience. If you could now, at age 58, go back and talk to your 20-year-old self who was first encountering the Thomas Cole painting in the Smithsonian back in 1981, or back to the guy who at age 45, whatever that was, 15 years ago, who had just won the National Magazine Award and was suddenly thinking, I'm not, that's great, but I'm not living up to this. What would you tell each of them? And would it be the same thing?
It would be what I just said. In fact, I just wrote that article. It's going to come out in the LA Times. But,
okay.
But what would I tell my younger self? I would counsel myself that midlife, that this middle Cole, the Cole painting about manhood, that's not actually about objective real-world success or failure. That's about the difficulty of feeling happy. And I would counsel myself, especially in my 30s, to understand that the next period could be rough. It's not for everyone. Some people have a great time in their 40s. I'd want to know that it was natural and normal and perfectly healthy, and I would want to warn myself to do all the things I didn't do, which is the advice that I just gave.
Good. Well, let's open it up. I think there should be two
we're
microphones, or maybe there's just...
We're videoing for the web, so
here.
Everyone needs to go to a microphone.
Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the idea of this curve. It's fundamental. That is, it's a curve after you've controlled for a lot of things like I guess, wealth and health and other things. So, like you say, I can believe it's very fundamental, and that raises a big question: what is the explanation? And I accept your explanation, but it occurs to me there may be another one or an additional one. It'd be too much chutzpah to say this is the right one and yours is wrong, but. I guess I would describe it as having to do with mortality and sense of mortality, and the sense of kind of competitiveness about achieving long life. So when you're young, first of all, you don't believe you feel like you have a whole life ahead of you. You don't even believe you're not going to die anytime soon. And then as you get into your 40s, 30s, 40s, and certainly into 50s, for various reasons, you become more and more aware of mortality and more aware that that life is limited, and that
there's a researcher who talks specifically about.
And then as you get older, though, as you get older and into your 60s and into your 70s, you get more and more proud of the fact that you survived longer than some other people have survived. And as you get into your 90s, you're very, very proud that you survived.
Awareness of mortality is definitely a factor, and we know that because one of the leading psychologists of the happiness curve, Laura Carstensen, does experiments where she manipulates people. She asks them to imagine that they're going to live only another, say, 5 or 10 years or another 30 or 40 years, and gets data about their priorities. And they shift, and she can actually make older people have the values of younger people and vice versa by changing the way they think about how much time they have left. So that's an important part of the values change.
Right.
As we get older, we want to invest more in the things that seem most meaningful. On the other hand, we also know that's not the whole story because chimps and orangutans don't know how much time they have left.
Well, that's
So
going to be my
what
question.
that tells me is that humans are complicated, and what's going on here is a combination of psychological factors that we're fully conscious of and very deep biological factors that we're not.
So
and it's both working together.
So one of the things I noticed about your trough, the period when you're descending sharply, it also corresponds to when people tend to have children in their home. Is there any sense that there's some relationship between raising children and the period of increasing unhappiness?
Not that you would know whereof you speak.
Yes, right?
So the bottom line about children is there's a bunch of research, and children make you happy once they're grown up. Having children is actually a stressor. It doesn't make you miserable, but it makes life, in the short term, it makes life more stressful and more difficult. However, the curve I showed you, the age curve, controls for children. So you're not seeing the children effect here, you're seeing the time effect. So both of these things can happen, right?
This reminds me of, I'm going to mangle the quote, but Dorothy Parker's, writing is awful, but it's nice to have written.
Yeah.
Raising children is awful, but it's nice to have raised them. Having raised them is fantastic.
So just to say, the 60s has been my best decade, and the 70s are really shaping up to be, and I'm really happy to see this. What I'm not sure I'm going to survive is the crisis of my 40-year-old kids. And they are in deep crisis, and the problem is they don't want the wisdom of the grandparent. They don't want the grandparent around. I don't know. There's a million reasons. I'm a journalist. I'm looking at it. But how do you help your child? You're knowing they're coming into this crisis. There are already warning signs, especially from the daughter-in-law, the powerful daughter-in-law. How do you help them realize that this crisis is going to be passing? It's going to eventually end. But there's a lot of us in this room.
I have to give you an answer that will sound flippant and self-serving,
Right.
but I actually honestly mean it. Give them this book.
I'm sorry. What was it?
Give them this book, or
I will.
some version of it.
If they'll read it.
When I was in my 40s, I don't think I would have been receptive
Right.
to a lecture.
Right.
Because there's so much pressure in our 40s to feel invulnerable, masters of the universe. But how do you help your child? You're knowing they're coming into this crisis. There are already warning signs, especially from the daughter-in-law, the powerful daughter-in-law. How do you help your child? You're knowing they're coming into this crisis. There are already warning signs, especially from the daughter-in-law, the powerful daughter-in-law. How do you help your child? You're knowing they're coming into this crisis. There are already warning signs, especially from the daughter-in-law, the powerful daughter-in-law. How do you help your child? You're knowing they're coming into this crisis. There are already warning signs, especially from the daughter-in-law, the powerful daughter-in-law. How do you help your child? You're knowing they're coming into this crisis. There are already warning signs, especially from the daughter-in-law, the powerful daughter-in-law. How do you help your child? You're knowing they're com I think I would have felt receptive to understanding that there's real science that can help me through it. And I think if part of one of the things that they come to understand is that reaching out to people is very helpful in this stage and that you should not be ashamed of any of these problems or issues, I think that will go a long way.
That's good. Okay.
Thank you.
Jonathan, I hope you hold me to this when I'm 40, but you can lecture me anytime. Lauren, I have a question. Basically, do you think that screens or social media and the cancerous effects that they seem to have on our emotional health might affect this curve? I mean, I guess not the curve, but the general happiness of people at different stages in life.
I don't know. It's not a question that's come up before, and that's something that's not controlled for. This curve shows up in countries where there's lots of social media and also in places like Afghanistan, where presumably there's not very much. But I honestly don't know what the effect of social media would be.
Do you have a guess?
It's a totally separate issue from age per se. My guess, based on having done some separate research, the psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who's looked at this, says the problem with social media is we all thought it would make ourselves more connected. That's the Facebook model, Mark Zuckerberg. Well, it turns out we're not connecting with people on social media. We're displaying for people on social media. We're showing off our status, our superiority. We're taking other people down a notch. That's the worst thing for happiness. So that's the issue we're dealing with social media. But remember, that's I think probably separate from the effect of age.
Hi. For many of us in this ideal age range, 50, 65 and up, is exactly the time in our lives when our parents are getting ill and dying. And I wonder how
which was the case for me as well.
I wonder how you squared those two effects.
First of all, in my life, oddly, the time my father got sick and then died with a really nasty neurological disease was also the time I was starting to come out of this malaise. Now, they coincided, so I wasn't sure. But that would have been harder to deal with without the beginning of a sense that I was turning a corner. What seems to happen as we age, again, it's not the whole story, your mileage will vary, but the aging process seems to give us some additional resources to cope with setbacks, things like setbacks to our health, and things like the things we have to deal with in family. For example, the aging process makes us less emotionally volatile. It reduces the amount of stress we feel in any given situation. It gives us added knowledge about life. So it's not going to solve the problems that we're dealing with at any age, but it does seem to give us additional emotional resources for coping in ways that are quite surprising, because I talk to people in their 70s and even 80s and even 90s who were themselves surprised at how much resilience they were finding at a time of their life where they'd expected to have great trouble coping. It's not the whole ballgame. Your mileage will vary, but it's encouraging.
So I think we've got time for one last question if anyone has one. And then I think Jonathan will be signing books here, right? Yes,
right. Thank you for coming here and sharing this with us.
I'm honored to be here.
I'm curious if there might be a difference among gender.
Great question. The answer, this is another big surprise. We all assume the happiness curve would be more pronounced for men than for women because, as you saw, the iconography is mostly about men and midlife crisis and sports cars and bimbos. There is no gender difference. People look for it again and again. It's simply not there in any of the data sets in any part of the world. And then if we think about, so why is midlife crisis so disproportionately associated with men? My conjecture is because historically in societies like ours, men have had so much more freedom to act out. Women were not able to display these midlife behaviors. And so midlife crisis came to be associated with men. I did a lot of surveying for this book. I sent a questionnaire to hundreds of people about their lives, male and female, and I looked at the research and I interviewed 50-50, more or less, of people in deep dive interviews about their lives. And the same was true of me. I did not find any gender differences at all. Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Well, thank you all for coming on this first quasi-sunny day in years. Thank you, John. Thank you, Brad. Thanks to Politics and Prose.
Thank you, Scott.
And, he will be signing books up here, so I highly recommend you come up and buy lots of copies.